was supposed to be a peaceful, celebratory dinner when our waiter quietly placed the bill in front of me. There was no smile on his face, no polite, "Take your time." Instead, he had written something in pen across the bottom of the receipt. 5 words that made my stomach drop. "Do not eat the special." When I looked up in confusion, the waiter met my eyes, shook his head once, and slowly mouthed the words, "The chef knows you." My heart stopped because I had never been in that restaurant before. At least, that's what I believed. "My name is Jenna Rowan. Tonight I learned that sometimes the past doesn't knock on your door. It invites you to dinner. If you believe some warnings are not coincidences, but lifelines, subscribe now and tell me in the comments where you are watching from." That evening started with joy. I wanted to celebrate my mother's recovery after weeks in the hospital. She had survived a difficult surgery and was finally strong enough to sit up, smile, and enjoy a proper meal. It had been a hard year for all of us. I am a nurse practitioner, and between working long shifts and raising my 10-year-old daughter Harper, there hasn't been much room for happiness. But tonight I wanted happiness. I wanted normal, a dinner out, just the 3 of us. 3 generations of Rowan women taking a breath after months of fear. The restaurant was new, elegant, and warm. Copper lights hung over each table, giving off a soft glow. There was a gentle mix of conversations, clinking silverware, and background jazz playing through hidden speakers. It was the kind of place that made you feel safe the moment you walked in. The kind of place where you trusted the people preparing your food without a second thought. Harper was in a good mood. She took a picture of the bread basket and said she wanted to start a food blog. My mother, Evelyn, looked more like her old self than she had in months. Her cheeks had color again, and she kept thanking me for bringing her here. The waiter, a young man with kind eyes, introduced himself as Caleb. He was polite, almost too polite, but I assumed it was just excellent customer service. Then something happened that I brushed aside at first. As Caleb read out the specials, he hesitated when he reached the last one. His eyes flicked up toward me, and for a moment, he looked as if he wanted to say something else but couldn't. The special of the night was a dish described as a personal creation by our head chef, Damien Holt. The moment I heard the name, I saw my mother pause. Her fork hovered above her plate. Harper didn't notice, but I did. My mother's expression changed. It wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition mixed with disbelief, as if she had just heard the name of someone she knew, but thought she would never hear again. I asked if she was all right. She forced a smile and said she was just tired, but I could see in her eyes that something about that name unsettled her deeply. Still, I didn't think too much of it. People react strangely after medical recovery, I told myself. The waiter recommended the chef's special, and my mother encouraged me to try it. She said, "Live a little, Jenna. You always choose the safe option." Harper nodded eagerly. "Yeah, Mom, be adventurous." I laughed and agreed. For once, maybe I should let go. But just then, Caleb's hand tightened slightly around his notepad. He looked directly at me and said quietly, "Maybe choose something else." That was the first moment I felt something shift. It was subtle, but clear. A warning wrapped in politeness. I should have listened, because within the next 30 minutes, I would learn that this chef was not a stranger. He had been waiting for me. As soon as Caleb walked away from the table, a tightness settled in my stomach that I couldn't shake. I tried to focus on Harper, who was showing my mother pictures on her tablet, but my eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen doors. Every time they swung open, I caught a glimpse of movement inside, flashes of white chef coats, steaming pans, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone looking out from behind the heat lamps, not watching the kitchen operations, but watching me specifically. I told myself I was being paranoid, probably just reacting to the stress of the past few months, but my mother's silence confirmed otherwise. She wasn't eating. She wasn't speaking. She sat perfectly still, her hands clasped on the table, her eyes locked on her water glass, like she was bracing herself for something she had spent years hoping would never happen. When I asked if she wanted to order an appetizer, she didn't respond. Instead, she leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "We should leave." Harper looked up, confused, and asked why. My mother shook her head and forced a strained smile, but she never looked toward the kitchen. It was as if she was afraid to make eye contact with anyone who might see her face. I was about to suggest we get our meals to go when Caleb returned, placing a glass of water in front of me, his hand trembling so badly a few drops spilled onto the table. When I asked if he was all right, he ignored my question and instead asked in a low voice if I had ever been to this restaurant before or met the chef. His tone wasn't casual curiosity, it was a test. When I told him no, that I had never heard of this place until I saw an ad online, he nodded slowly, as if my answer confirmed something terrifying. Without another word, he set the bill on the table and walked away quickly. I frowned and reached for it, confused as to why he had brought it before we had even ordered. But when I unfolded it, I saw no printed charges, only handwriting, 4 words, written in black ink: "Do not eat the special." My heartbeat quickened as I looked up, trying to meet Caleb's eyes across the dining area. He stood near the beverage station, pretending to refill glasses, but his eyes remained on me with an urgency that bordered on panic. I mouthed the words, "Why?" and he shook his head rapidly, then mouthed something back very slowly. I had to focus carefully to understand what he was saying. "The chef knows you." My first instinct was to look toward the kitchen. The swinging doors were still. No staff moved through them now. The entire dining room seemed to shift in atmosphere, the chatter around us fading, the laughter dying down. I could feel eyes on me, not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. Harper asked me what was wrong, but my voice wouldn't form words. My mother whispered, "Jenna, I need you to stay calm and listen to me. We have to leave now without asking questions." Her voice shook, not from illness, but from fear. The kind of fear that comes from remembering something you spent your life trying to forget. I whispered back, asking if she knew the chef. She closed her eyes and nodded. Before she could say anything else, the kitchen doors opened, but no one walked out. Instead, a figure appeared behind the glass pane in the door. A man wearing a chef's coat, standing utterly still, facing us. His face was partially in shadow, but his eyes were unmistakable, fixed on mine with recognition, not curiosity. It was the look someone gives when a long-awaited moment has finally come. My breath caught in my throat. My daughter sensed the shift and grabbed my arm. I wanted to stand, to walk out, to leave everything on the table and never look back, but my legs would not move. It wasn't paralysis. It was realization. Something inside me, something buried deep, stirred. A memory, not clear but fragmented, flashed in my mind. A kitchen, a man's voice, my childhood nickname spoken softly like a threat. I blinked hard, trying to dismiss it, but when I opened my eyes, the chef was still standing there, and for the first time in my adult life, I heard that nickname again. He mouthed it silently through the glass. He didn't need the waiter to speak for him anymore. The moment I saw the chef mouth my childhood nickname through the glass, something inside me shifted, not just fear, but a deep, primal instinct that told me this was no coincidence. I had spent most of my life believing my earliest memories started around age 6, but as I stared at his face, faint impressions flickered at the edge of my consciousness. Burning garlic, a laughing voice, a hand gripping my wrist too tightly. My mother suddenly stood up, knocking over her water glass, her voice barely controlled as she said, "We need to go to the car now." Harper clutched my arm, confused but obedient. Caleb appeared beside our table so fast it startled me. He didn't ask permission. He whispered urgently, "Follow me now, and do not look toward the kitchen." His tone was not a suggestion. It was a warning from someone who had accepted that his own life was already at risk. My mother hesitated, her face pale as ash, and for a split second, I saw raw regret in her eyes. She had kept a secret, thinking it would protect me, but in shielding me from the past, she had unknowingly delivered us into danger. I grabbed her hand firmly. "Whatever this is, it ends tonight," I said, my voice steady, not because I wasn't afraid, but because a deeper part of me, one forged by motherhood, refused to let my child be touched by the darkness of my past. As Caleb guided us through a narrow service corridor, the restaurant lights suddenly flickered. The hum of conversation in the dining room dropped to silence, as if someone had pressed pause on the entire building. We passed a row of framed photos on the wall, images of the chef smiling beside celebrities, newspaper clippings praising his genius. And then, one photo stopped me cold. It was a faded newspaper article from 27 years ago about a missing child in our hometown. The child's face was blurred from age, but the headline below it contained a name I had never spoken aloud as an adult, but had heard in nightmares as a child. 4-year-old Jenna Rowan disappears, returns home with no memory. I stopped walking. My mind tried to resist what I was seeing, but my body already knew the truth. The restaurant wasn't chosen randomly. It wasn't a coincidence. I had been led here, and the person who led me was the one man my mother had spent my entire life hiding from. Caleb tugged my arm. "He remembers everything you don't," he said. "And he made this special for you." He pointed toward the kitchen. "He's not trying to poison you. He's trying to make you remember him." My mother began to sob, pressing her hands to her mouth. "I thought he died. They told me his family moved after what he did to you." She looked at me like she was seeing the frightened child I once was. Harper looked between us, confused, her eyes filling with tears as she whispered, "Mom, what's happening? Did that man hurt you?" I crouched down, taking her face in my hands. "He will never touch you," I promised. Then I stood and made my decision. I was done running, done hiding behind walls of memory. If this man wanted me to remember him, I would confront the truth, but on my terms, not his. I looked at Caleb. "Take me to him." My mother tried to protest, but I held up my hand. "If I run now, he will never stop. This ends tonight." Caleb nodded solemnly. We turned a corner into a dim hallway leading directly to the kitchen doors. Behind those doors, I could hear the faint rhythm of a knife chopping and the slow whistle of someone humming an old lullaby. A lullaby I suddenly recognized. The very first song I remembered hearing as a child. A sound only someone who once held me would know. Caleb reached for the door, then paused. "Once you go in," he said, "there's no going back to not knowing." I inhaled deeply, squared my shoulders, and met my reflection in the metal door. "I don't want to go back," I said. "I want to know everything." And with that, he opened the door, and I stepped into the kitchen to face the man who never forgot me. The kitchen doors swung shut behind me with a soft thud, sealing me in a space that felt more like a memory than a room. The lighting was warm and bright, nothing like the dark, shadowy kitchens in movies. Copper pots hung perfectly in place, knives glistened under lights, and everything smelled of rosemary, lemon, and roasted garlic, comforting scents that should have calmed me, but instead brought a sharp ache to my chest, like I had smelled them before in a life I could not fully recall. Standing at the center of the kitchen was the chef, Damien Holt, wearing a white coat and holding a ladle in his hand as casually as if he had been waiting to serve me. He looked younger than I expected, his skin smooth, hair neatly combed back, but his eyes were what rooted me to the floor. They were not the eyes of a stranger. They were the eyes of someone who once looked down at me as I sat in a small chair, eating something warm from a spoon he held out to me. He set the ladle down and spoke my name, not the name I use now, but the name only my father used to call me when I was a toddler. I froze as memories crashed through me, flashes of a kitchen tiled in blue, a little girl with scraped knees, a teenage boy watching her from across the counter with unsettling fascination. My mother stepped forward then, her voice breaking as she said, "Damien, you promised you would leave her alone." He turned toward her with a smile that held no warmth. "You promised you would tell her the truth," he replied. "But you buried it. You tried to erase me, yet she came back." He looked at me again, almost tenderly. "Because this is where she belongs." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I forced myself to look directly at him. "What did you do to me?" My voice was steady, but inside, I braced for whatever storm was coming. Damien's smile widened. He walked slowly toward the stovetop and lifted a lid off a pot. Steam rose, carrying a smell so familiar it made my knees weak. Chicken broth, carrots, dill. My favorite meal when I was 4. He ladled it into a bowl and placed it on the counter in front of me as if presenting a gift. "You loved this," he said gently. "You said it tasted like home. I made it for you every day." My mother's voice rang out desperately. "Because you wouldn't let her leave. You watched her. You locked the doors. You told her she was your family." Damien's expression tightened. "She was my family. She still is." I backed away, the truth crystallizing in my mind. Damien was not just a neighbor. He had been obsessed with me as a child, convinced we were meant to be together forever. When I disappeared at 4 years old, it was because he took me. He hid me in his home, fed me, spoke to me, tried to make me believe I belonged to him. The authorities found me days later after he fell asleep. He was sent away, and my memories were intentionally suppressed to protect me. But he had never forgotten me. He had built this restaurant, crafted this night, to recreate those lost days and reclaim me. "You took my childhood," I said quietly. "You do not get to take anything else." Damien tilted his head, as if observing a wild animal that refused to submit. "You are not afraid. I knew you would return stronger. That is why I waited." He stepped forward then, pulling something from his pocket, a locket. He opened it to reveal a picture of me as a child, smiling with missing teeth. "I kept this safe," he said, "for when you were ready." Before I could respond, the kitchen door burst open and Caleb rushed in, pulling Harper behind him. Damien's eyes flicked to my daughter, and in that instant, everything inside me ignited into pure instinct. I stepped between them. "You will not touch her," I said. My voice was low, unwavering. Damien looked stunned for a moment, as if witnessing something sacred and untouchable. Then, slowly, he lowered the locket and placed it on the counter. In that silence, I understood something deeper. He was not trying to physically harm me. He wanted control over my identity, over who I believed I was. And he had lost that power the moment I chose to stand between him and my daughter. He looked at me with a strange sorrow then, as though realizing his fantasy had finally shattered. "If you leave now," he said softly, "you will never remember the love we had." My response came without hesitation. That was never love. That was possession. In that final moment, the police rushed in, called by Caleb's earlier distress signal. They handcuffed Damien as he watched me, not with rage, but with defeat. As he was led away, he whispered one final sentence. "You may not remember me, but I will always remember us." The kitchen felt colder as the doors swung shut behind him. But for the first time, I was not afraid. I was wide awake, and I was free. The restaurant closed that night, not because it was scheduled to, but because it had become the scene of a truth that had been buried for nearly 3 decades. As the police escorted Damien out in handcuffs, his white chef's coat stained from broth and sweat, I stood with my arms around Harper, while my mother leaned heavily against the wall, her body shaking with silent sobs. The weight of what had been hidden from me my entire life did not crush me as I would have expected. It steadied me. It grounded me in a reality I had sensed but never fully understood. My entire life, I believed my anxieties were irrational, my nightmares meaningless. Now I knew they were echoes from a past everyone tried to erase. The next morning, news spread across the town. Damien Holt, celebrity chef, newly opened restaurateur, beloved culinary figure, had been arrested on charges relating to my abduction decades ago, charges that were never filed because the truth was never made public. As more evidence came out, it turned out I wasn't the only one he fixated on. Other girls had been groomed through food competitions, mentorship programs, and culinary scholarships. He had spent years building a career not for success, but for access. Access to the memories he couldn't let go of. When reporters asked me for a statement, I declined. This wasn't about publicity or justice served in headlines. This was about reclaiming my identity from the one person who had tried to define it for me. My mother confessed everything to me in the quiet of my living room, how she blamed herself for trusting a teenage neighbor to watch me for an afternoon, how she lied to protect my reputation, how she thought if I never remembered, I would never be hurt again. I didn't forgive her instantly. Forgiveness is not an event. It is a process. But I did tell her this. You protected me the only way you knew how, but I am no longer that child, and I don't need protection anymore. I need truth. Harper, in her innocence and wisdom, helped me find the strength to face what had happened without letting it define me. She asked me one night, "Mom, does this mean that man owns your past?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "It means he tried, and he failed." We began therapy together, not because we were broken, but because healing is not about forgetting. It is about remembering without fear. As time passed, I found myself returning to the kitchen, not his kitchen, but mine, my own space, with the sounds of sizzling pans and laughter from my daughter, and my mother humming while she sliced vegetables with slow, careful hands. I realized something powerful. Food had been his tool for control, but now it was going to be mine for healing. The first night I cooked the same soup he made for me as a child, I served it to my family without fear, and then I poured the recipe into the trash. We didn't need it anymore. We had our own food, our own stories, our own way of moving forward. A month later, I received a letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sentence written in neat, precise handwriting. "I will always be your beginning." I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I smiled, and I burned the letter in my backyard fire pit. Because he was wrong. He had been a chapter in my life, but not the beginning of my story, and certainly not the end. That night, I tucked Harper into bed and sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street, feeling peace settle into the deepest part of me. Not peace born from avoidance, but peace born from truth faced head-on. I had not only survived my story, I had taken it back. And that is what I want every person watching this to understand. Your past may shape you, but it does not own you. Your trauma may whisper, but it does not get the final word. You do. If this story moved you or opened your eyes to the strength within survival, make sure to subscribe and comment where you are watching from. Your story matters, and you are not alone.